The city of New York sparkled like a sea of lights that cold night. For many, the city symbolized dreams and possibilities, but for Aiden Walker and Elena Sinclair, it represented something entirely different. Both felt trapped, as if New York were a golden cage, grand on the outside, suffocating on the inside. Aiden, 28 years old, walked through Brooklyn Bridge Park with his shoulders hunched against the biting cold. His worn-out coat barely protected him from the wind blowing off the East River, but he was used to facing difficulties. The exhaustion of weeks without proper sleep was etched on his face. He devoted all his time to the NGO he had founded, an organization focused on helping marginalized youth get off the streets and find new opportunities. The NGO, however, was on the brink of collapse. With funding cuts and a lack of donations, Aiden didn't know how he would keep the project alive. He spent his days trying to convince politicians and business people to support his cause, but all he received were empty promises or closed doors. Despite this, he refused to give up. Even when everything seemed stacked against him, something in his heart kept him going. On the other side of the city, in the heart of luxury and opulence, Elena Sinclair, 25, was the center of attention. In the grand ballroom of a five-star hotel, she danced among important guests, wearing a red dress that turned heads wherever she went. The youngest daughter of Victor Sinclair, a financial tycoon, Elena had grown up surrounded by wealth and power. To everyone there, she was the epitome of perfection, but inside she felt empty. That night's party was just another business maneuver for her family. The billion-dollar deal they were celebrating would bring even more money and influence to the Sinclairs, but Elena knew that this kind of success came at a cost. While her father and brothers toasted with satisfied smiles, she thought about the thousands of lives that would be harmed by decisions like these. Despite being part of the family, Elena hated the system they helped sustain. Even surrounded by luxury and powerful people, she felt alone. The weight of family expectations crushed her. It wasn't just the burden of being a Sinclair. It was also the pressure to one day take over the business, marry a suitor chosen for financial interests, and live a life where she had no voice. That same night, Aiden and Elena were about to meet, and although they didn't know it, that meeting would change everything. Aiden's NGO had managed to organize a last-minute fundraising event in the same hotel where the Sinclair party was taking place. It was a strange coincidence, almost ironic. While the rich celebrated their profits in the main ballroom, Aiden was trying to convince a few people downstairs to invest in a better future for the youth he helped. Before the presentation began, Aiden went up to the hotel terrace to adjust the lights and enjoy a moment of silence. There he found Elena. She was alone, holding a champagne glass, her gaze lost in the city lights. She seemed oblivious to the music and animated conversations echoing from the ballroom. When their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Aiden froze for a moment. The woman in front of him was unlike anything he was used to. She seemed like a distant, almost unreal figure, but there was something in her eyes that immediately intrigued him. Despite her confident posture and elegant dress, her eyes betrayed a sadness he recognized at once. Elena, in turn, was curious. The simple, determined man in front of her seemed out of place in such a luxurious environment, but in an interesting way. He had a serious expression, but also a quiet strength that caught her attention. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to leave a mark on both. Aiden didn't know who she was. To him, Elena was just an elegant woman who, for some reason, seemed as out of place as he did in that hotel. Elena didn't know much about Aiden either, but something about him made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. However, the city doesn't forgive such bold encounters. What seemed like a simple moment was, in fact, the beginning of a great irony. The Sinclair event, which Elena despised, was directly tied to Aiden's NGO. The billion-dollar deal her family was celebrating would redirect funds that could help organizations like Aiden's toward more profitable projects. If he knew that, he probably never would have set foot in that hotel. But that night, neither of them knew these details. All they knew was that they had found someone different, someone who seemed to see the world the same way they did. As Elena returned to the ballroom and Aiden to his presentation, fate had already begun writing their story. Two strangers, from completely opposite worlds, were about to cross a line many would consider forbidden. A connection between them was not only unlikely, but dangerous. Still, what began as a simple glance on the terrace would spark a journey that would challenge the power of families, differences, and secrets that kept them apart. Aiden woke up the next morning feeling the weight of yet another night without success. The event had brought only a few promises of donations, nothing that could resolve the NGO's critical situation. He had to face reality. Without a major turnaround, the project he had been fighting to keep alive wouldn't last beyond the month. As he sipped on a weak coffee in his small Queens apartment, images from the previous night replayed in his mind. He remembered Elena's gaze, the way she seemed lost on the terrace, and wondered who she really was. The city was full of faces and stories, but there was something about that woman that he couldn't get out of his head. Meanwhile, Elena woke up in a luxurious room overlooking Central Park. Her routine began with coffee prepared by staff and an endless list of appointments sent by her family's assistant. She was supposed to attend a meeting that afternoon to discuss the next steps of the billion-dollar deal, but she couldn't focus. Her thoughts were stuck on the serious expression of the man she had met on the terrace. Who was he? She wondered. Aiden's simplicity contrasted with everything she knew. He didn't seem afraid to show who he was, and that intrigued her. Throughout the day, their lives continued on opposite paths. Aiden spent the morning visiting a community center in Brooklyn, where the youth he helped struggled to stay off the streets. Many of them were losing hope, just like him. Each visit was a reminder that time was running out and solutions seemed increasingly out of reach. Meanwhile, Elena was stuck in cold, calculated meetings where everything revolved around numbers and profits. Sitting at the head of the table, she listened to her father, Victor Sinclair, outline his goals with an enthusiasm she did not share. To him, the billion-dollar deal was a symbol of power, a way to solidify the family's name as an unbeatable empire. Elena had always known that her opinion mattered little there. Her presence was merely to reinforce the image of family unity. But that day, as she listened to the expansion plans that would threaten entire communities, she felt a different kind of weight. Something deeply unsettled her, as if she were betraying not only herself, but something greater. That evening, Aiden was reviewing financial reports in a small, quiet cafe in Brooklyn. His mind was overwhelmed, but he knew he had to keep going. It was then that he heard a voice behind him. Aiden Walker? He turned around, surprised. Elena was there, out of context, in a long, discreet coat. She looked as out of place in that environment as he had at the hotel the night before. "How do you know my name?" he asked, unable to hide his shock. "I saw your name on the event materials from yesterday. I thought you might be here. I don't know why," she replied, almost nervously. Her presence made him uneasy. He knew she was someone from the rich and powerful circle that often ignored causes like his. But something in her tone sounded sincere. "Look, if you're here to donate, great. If not, I'm busy," he said, turning back to his papers. "I'm not here to donate. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I came because I want to understand. Understand what you do, what you were doing in that place," she said. Reluctantly, Aiden briefly explained the NGO and the constant struggle to keep it running. Elena listened in silence, absorbing every word. She didn't mention her connection to the event or the impact her family's deal would have on organizations like his. "That sounds important," she said at the end. "It is, but it seems like no one else thinks so," he replied bitterly. Elena felt a lump in her throat. For years, she had ignored the consequences of her family's actions, but now it seemed impossible to escape them. There was something about Aiden that made her want to be different. In the days that followed, unexpected changes began to unfold. Elena became more interested in Aiden's work, and he, though hesitant, began to trust her. Their conversations were like windows into different worlds. Elena spoke about the burden of being a Sinclair, while Aiden spoke about the challenges of fighting against a system that seemed unbeatable. But their growing connection did not go unnoticed. Victor Sinclair, always attentive to his daughter's movements, began to suspect her change in behavior. He had no patience for distractions, especially when the future of the business was at stake. On Aiden's side, his partner at the NGO, Marcus, was also concerned. "Do you really think someone like her is going to help you? These people live on another planet, Aiden," Marcus said. "I know that. But there's something about her. I can't explain it." As their bond grew stronger, so did the pressure around them. The world seemed determined to keep them apart, and the truth about the impact of Victor Sinclair's deal was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Aiden tried to focus on his work, but Elena's presence had become a constant in his mind. He didn't know what to think. How could he trust someone so different from him, from a world that represented everything he fought against? Despite this, their recent interactions had sparked a glimmer of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. Meanwhile, Elena faced a growing internal conflict. Each conversation with Aiden made her see more clearly the destructive impact of her family's actions. The stories he shared about the youth struggling to survive in an unjust system left her restless. She saw photos, names, and faces of those who would be directly affected by the new billion-dollar deal her family was celebrating. One night, unable to ignore her thoughts, Elena decided to act. Taking advantage of a moment when her father was absent, she entered his office and began searching through confidential documents. There, she found details about the deal that confirmed the worst. Large companies were diverting funds meant for low-income communities, exactly as Aiden had described. The numbers were clear and brutal. Social housing projects, community schools, and organizations like Aiden's were being directly harmed. Elena froze for a moment, holding the papers with trembling hands. Her father knew exactly what he was doing, and worse, he believed it was necessary. The next day, Elena sought out Aiden at the community center. He was coordinating an activity with the youth when he saw her walk in. The surprise on his face was evident, but he quickly resumed his guarded demeanor. "Did you come to see what else you can take from me?" he asked, his voice heavy with irony. "No, Aiden. I came because you were right," she replied, handing him the documents she had taken from her father's office. Aiden read them in silence, his expression hardening with each page. "So, your family really is destroying everything I've been trying to build," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I didn't know this until now. I want to help, but I don't know how," Elena admitted, looking at him with a mix of shame and determination. Aiden remained silent for a long moment. He didn't know if he could trust her, but at the same time, it was hard to ignore the sincerity in her eyes. "This isn't just about me, Elena. It's about these people. They've lost everything and are trying to start over. If your help isn't genuine, I'd rather you leave now," he said bluntly. "My help is genuine, Aiden. I just need you to tell me where to start," she replied. From that moment, an unlikely alliance began to form. Elena started using her influence to draw attention to Aiden's work, organizing meetings with people who could help. She knew she was taking risks by defying her family, but every step she took alongside Aiden seemed to give her back a bit of the freedom she had lost. However, obstacles quickly began to arise. Victor Sinclair soon realized that his daughter was involved in something off-script. When he discovered she was helping a man like Aiden, a simple activist threatening his business, he was furious. "You're playing against your own family, Elena," he shouted, slamming his hand on his office desk. "I'm not playing against anyone, Father. I'm trying to fix something that's wrong," she replied, keeping her voice firm, though she trembled inside. "Wrong? Wrong is wasting everything we've built to feed naive illusions. You are a Sinclair, don't forget that." Elena left the office with a heavy heart, but she didn't give up. Deep down, she knew her fight would not only be against the system, but against her own blood. Meanwhile, Aiden also faced pressure from his side. Marcus, his partner at the NGO, was concerned about Elena's presence. "Do you really think someone like her is going to help us?" "She's a Sinclair, Aiden. The same family that's destroying us," Marcus said, looking him straight in the eye. "I know that, Marcus, but she's trying, and right now she's the only help we've got," Aiden replied, trying to hide his own doubts. "Just be careful. These people never do anything without a reason." The following days tested them both. Aiden and Elena began working together to find ways to save the NGO while facing the consequences of their choices. For Aiden, it was hard to fully trust Elena, and for her it was painful to face the fact that her family was the biggest enemy of the man she was beginning to admire. The tension between them grew, but so did their connection. Each conversation was marked by honesty and mutual respect, drawing them closer. Aiden began to see that Elena wasn't just a Sinclair. She was someone who wanted to fight, just like him, but the world around them wasn't willing to leave them in peace. Victor Sinclair, determined to protect his business, began plotting ways to stop Elena. Meanwhile, politicians and businessmen linked to him intensified their attacks on Aiden's NGO, shutting doors and cutting off opportunities. The conflict was becoming increasingly intense. Elena and Aiden knew they were walking a dangerous line, but neither was willing to back down. The protest in front of the community center marked a turning point in Aiden and Elena's fight. With the new documents in hand, they knew they had enough ammunition to dismantle Victor Sinclair's empire. However, both were aware that the approaching confrontation would not be easy. Aiden decided to reorganize the NGO's operations. Even with the center closed, he managed to temporarily shelter the youth in smaller community spaces. The situation was precarious, but the collective effort of volunteers and supporters demonstrated the strength of the network he had built over the years. Meanwhile, Elena devoted herself to studying the confidential documents provided by her mother. They not only confirmed the corrupt practices of Victor's company, but also revealed direct connections with influential politicians, major corporations, and even international institutions. The scale of the scheme was far greater than she had imagined. If this goes public, it's not just my father who will fall. It's an entire system, she commented as she read the papers with Aiden. That's exactly why he's so desperate to stop us. Despite the tension, the two began to feel a deeper connection. The time they spent together, facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, brought them closer in ways that transcended their fight against Victor. One night, while working late in the small office, Aiden looked at Elena and said, "I never thanked you for all this, for risking your life, for believing in my cause." She smiled, tired but sincere. "It's not just your cause, Aiden. It's ours." In that moment, the closeness between them became undeniable. But before they could explore their feelings, Elena received a message on her phone. It was from an unknown number, but the content was clear. "You think you can destroy me, but you still don't know anything." Elena showed the message to Aiden. "It's him," Aiden said without hesitation. "My father is trying to intimidate us, but we can't back down now," she replied. However, the message was just the beginning of a new wave of attacks. The next morning, headlines emerged with personal information about Elena, strategically leaked to harm her image. Tabloids explored her love life, suggesting that her involvement with Aiden was merely a form of rebellion against her family, while more serious newspapers implied that she had used NGO funds to finance her fight against Victor. "He's playing dirty," Marcus said, as he read the news on his phone. "He always plays dirty, but we have our weapons too," Elena replied firmly. The NGO organized another press conference, this time to present the new documents exposing not just Victor, but the institutions that collaborated with him. The plan was simple: turn the case into a public matter so significant that Victor could no longer manipulate things behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Victor's allies began to back away. Major companies involved in the scheme started issuing public statements, attempting to distance themselves from the scandal. The pressure was mounting from all sides, but Victor was not willing to fall without a fight. He planned one final move, something that could destroy not only Aiden and Elena, but everything they had built together. "If they want war, they'll have war," Victor declared as he instructed his team to gather information that could turn the tables. The day of the press conference arrived, and the event hall was packed with journalists, activists, and onlookers. The atmosphere was tense. On one side, Aiden and Elena prepared to present the documents that could dismantle Victor Sinclair's empire. On the other, Victor watched from a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. On stage, Aiden opened the conference with a brief introduction, thanking supporters and emphasizing the importance of fighting the system that perpetuates injustices. He then passed the microphone to Elena, who, despite her determined gaze, felt her heart racing. "For years, I was part of a family that represents power and wealth, but today, I'm here to show that behind this power are secrets that must be exposed. This isn't just about my family, but about everyone who profits from the suffering of the most vulnerable," she declared, before presenting the documents on the screen. The evidence detailed bribery schemes, data manipulation, and even threats orchestrated by Victor Sinclair and his allies. As images and excerpts from emails were displayed, the audience reacted with murmurs of outrage. Journalists fired questions, trying to capture every detail. But before the presentation could conclude, The hall erupted in whispers. All eyes turned to the back of the room, where Victor Sinclair entered, flanked by a team of lawyers and security guards. He approached the stage with a cold smile, taking the microphone handed to him by one of his allies. "What an impressive show," Victor began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But unfortunately, it's all a grand manipulation." Elena narrowed her eyes, feeling her blood run cold. "You're lying, father. All the evidence is here, and the world can see who you really are." Victor ignored her comment and addressed the audience. "What you don't know is that this story was built on lies. This man," he said, pointing to Aiden, "used my daughter to infiltrate our family and steal confidential information. He manipulates the truth to appear as a hero, but is nothing more than an opportunist." The room fell silent as Victor pulled out an envelope filled with documents. "Here is proof that Aiden Walker diverted donations from his NGO for personal use. The money he claims was for the youth was actually used to finance his fight against me." Elena felt the ground fall from under her. "That's not true," she shouted as Aiden, stunned, tried to process the accusations. Victor smirked, satisfied with the impact of his words. "You think you're facing a villain, but the truth is these two created a farce to gain fame and destroy my reputation." The audience began murmuring, divided between believing the new accusations or the evidence Elena had presented. "He's lying. This is just an attempt to distract from the evidence against him." Aiden tried to argue, but the doubt had already been planted. At that moment, Theo, the lawyer allied with Aiden, appeared on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is the desperation of a man who knows he's lost. The evidence against Victor Sinclair has been verified by independent experts. And as for the accusations against Aiden Walker, here's the truth." Theo displayed documents refuting Victor's claims, showing that the NGO's donations had been properly accounted for and used as declared. "This is the kind of tactic a powerful man uses to silence those who dare to challenge him. But we won't be silenced," Theo declared as the audience erupted into applause. Victor, however, was not yet defeated. He looked at Elena with an expression of disdain. "You think you've won, my daughter? You don't understand what's at stake. No matter what you say or show, this world is made for people like me, not people like you. And that's exactly why we need to change, father. Because your world is crumbling, and you know it," Elena replied with a strength that surprised even herself. At that moment, something unexpected happened. Louise, the longtime assistant to the Sinclair family, entered the hall holding an envelope. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I speak?" she asked, drawing everyone's attention. Louise, who had worked for the Sinclairs for decades, revealed that she had additional evidence against Victor, including recordings and financial records he never knew she had kept. "For years I served this family, but I can no longer turn a blind eye to what's happening. The truth must prevail, no matter the cost." The recordings were displayed on the screen, showing Victor in private meetings planning to destroy Aiden's NGO and using his influence to silence opposition. The room exploded with murmurs and applause as journalists scrambled to capture every detail. For the first time, Victor looked truly defeated. He attempted to leave the hall but was surrounded by reporters and activists demanding answers. Aiden and Elena exchanged glances, exhausted but relieved. They had done it. "I think this is the end, at least for him," Aiden said, giving a tired smile. "It's the end of a cycle, but the beginning of something much bigger," Elena replied, holding his hand. Days after the press conference, the revelations continued to reverberate across the country. Victor Sinclair was formally investigated for corruption, bribery, and financial crimes. His once untouchable empire began to crumble under the weight of the evidence. Partner companies severed ties, and politicians who once allied with him distanced themselves from any association. For Elena, the outcome was bittersweet. She knew she had done the right thing, but the cost was high. Officially disinherited, she had to rebuild her life from scratch. However, for the first time, she felt free to be who she truly was, without the suffocating expectations of her family. Aiden's NGO experienced a positive turnaround. With the public exposure and growing support, donations began pouring in from all over the country. The community center was reopened, larger and better equipped than before. Youth who had lost hope returned, now with new opportunities and resources. Still, Aiden knew there was much more work to be done. The system he and Elena had challenged was far larger than one man or one company. "We've knocked down one piece, but the game goes on," he told Marcus while walking through the new community center. "Yeah, but this victory showed us we can change the rules," Marcus replied confidently. Elena remained by Aiden's side, now in a new role. She used her experience and knowledge to help the NGO expand its operations and develop new strategies. Though she still carried the weight of being a Sinclair, she saw it as an opportunity to turn what was once privilege into a tool for change. 6 months later, the community center was livelier than ever. The renovated building housed not only activities for the youth but also workshops, lectures, and even a small community library. Aiden's NGO had grown, expanding its operations to other cities. At the entrance of the center, a newly inaugurated plaque read, "New Home, a place to start over." The idea to rename it had come from Elena, symbolizing a future built on the ruins of the past. Aiden watched the activity with a mix of pride and humility. He knew the journey had been long and full of challenges, but every smile he saw was a reminder that all the effort had been worth it. Elena appeared beside him, holding a folder full of notes for future projects. "Are you sure you're ready to open a second center in Chicago?" she asked with a playful smile. "I've already told you, I'm never ready, but if you're with me, I think we can do anything," he replied sincerely. "I'll always be here." In the distance, they saw Theo, Marcus, and a few young people laughing as they carried boxes of books for the new library. The scene was simple but full of meaning. "I think we're on the right path," Elena said, watching the scene with a satisfied smile. "We are, and this is just the beginning," Aiden replied. As the sun shone over the community center, Aiden and Elena knew that while the road ahead would still have challenges, they were ready to face them together. After all, they had crossed all forbidden lines to get there, and it had changed their lives forever. The story of Aiden and Elena is not just about the love that grew between them, but about courage, resilience, and the fight for a more just world. How often are we challenged to choose between what is easy and what is right? And how often, like them, do we face forces that seem greater than ourselves? Just as Aiden fought to keep his NGO alive and Elena defied her family, you too can be a voice for change. Whether in your community, your relationships, or the way you view the world, small actions have the power to transform realities. Share this story with someone who needs inspiration to keep fighting for their dreams, or to find the courage to challenge the status quo. And remember, no matter how big the challenges, love, truth, and determination always have the potential to win. Now it's your turn. What forbidden lines are you willing to cross to change the world?